I don't share a lot of personal stuff. It probably looks on the outside like everything is going great and it's all success all the time. And while I've been really successful and I've been really grateful for this business, it has been a struggle. There's been times of struggle, and getting into it was the hardest part. And I'm so glad though that I did, because my life has changed so much in so many amazing ways, and I know that it can do real estate and investing and starting your own business can do the same thing for so many other people. And because of that, I want to share a little bit about my journey. And for a bunch of reasons, and you're going to see why here in a second, but sometimes it's hard to be real and be honest because it makes you really vulnerable, but also you just don't want people to think you're like, I don't know, a spoiled brat or something. And the more people that I share this story with, the more I realize like how much in common we have and how many other people struggle with the same thing. And so for that reason, I'm going to share. So about, I guess, 5 years ago, I got out of the Army. And my husband and I were active duty. I went to West Point. That's where we met. Went there for 4 years, and then I served about 8 years on active duty. And did everything I could in those first 8 years. I volunteered for everything. I graduated from sapper school. I went to all the pre-ranger training. I was among the first women to do all the pre-ranger training and all the ranger training. And I deployed to Iraq. I volunteered for a deployment to Afghanistan. I volunteered for lots of different things, did my command while I was in the Army, and just was honestly really good at it. Definitely a top performer. And I hoped that I could stay the course for a while, and we had hoped that we could do the dual military thing. That's what they call it when a husband and wife are in the military. They call it dual military. It was going pretty well, but we knew once we had kids it would change quite a bit, because my husband is very specialized. He's in the special operations field, and that really means he's super busy and he's gone all the time. And so we knew once we had kids it was going to just change everything. I guess I didn't realize how much it was going to change, or how much my mindset was going to change, until we had our kid. I spent 3 months home with her, which I got really lucky because the month that she was born, the Army changed maternity leave from 6 weeks to 12 weeks. And I actually took an extra week off because I didn't have childcare for her. So I stayed home with her for 13 weeks. And I totally thought 6 weeks was a long time before I had my own kid. And I was like, what are these moms complaining about? Like, 6 weeks is plenty of time. 6 weeks is not enough time. 12 weeks, 13 weeks is still not enough time. It is so hard to go back to work after having a kid. But anyway, I did 13 weeks in. 3 days into going back to work, I got called into my boss's office. He's a full bird colonel. It's a really high rank in the Army, one step below general. And he asked me how the little tiny room that they set aside for me was working out, because I was pumping, and he wanted to make sure that that room was, able to accommodate my needs to pump so I could keep breastfeeding my baby. And I thought that was really, really cool, because I'd rarely had a boss in the Army that had even cared about stuff like that. And so the fact that they set aside a room for me, which they didn't have to, it was literally a closet, but they cleaned it out, they put a chair in there, and I had my own private space. And I had thought when I was on maternity leave that I was going to be like pumping in the car. So the fact that they did this for me was super awesome. And he called me into his office to see how I was doing, how things were going now that I was back to work, how the baby was, and just to check on everything. And he was super supportive, and I was really grateful for that. Especially because he's the first boss that I think would have even thought to have a conversation with me about it. And to be honest, most bosses that I had would never have been mature enough to have a conversation about breastfeeding. So that was really cool. And so anyway, I walked out of the office, got back to my desk, and I had an email that said I was going to Afghanistan in about 3 months. So my daughter at the time was 3 months old. 3 months later, I was going to go to Afghanistan. And my husband was already scheduled to go to Iraq that same month, and our daughter, like I said, would have been 6 months old. So we didn't really have what they call a family care plan, which is where someone comes and takes care of your kid while you both are deployed. We would have basically had to send her to my parents or his parents, who would have to put her in daycare full time, pick her up, drop her off, and, spend less time with her than I was, really, while I was overseas. And I thought it was just a really interesting, dichotomy, I guess, from walking out of my boss's office, who cared so much about me being able to breastfeed, to, oh, by the way, you're going overseas across the world, And obviously it would have been impossible to keep breastfeeding, and that was super frustrating. And I just knew in that moment that I wasn't going. I would not be leaving my daughter. I literally said, I laughed. I laughed out loud because I knew there was nothing that would separate me from my daughter. I couldn't even, it was hard enough for me to go to work and leave her at home with the nanny and drive 30 miles away, much less, 30 hours on a plane across the world. So I knew I wasn't going to do it. I knew that my time in the Army was up because I wasn't a good soldier. The whole point of being a soldier is preparing for deployment and deploying and doing all those things, and I didn't want to do it. And so I knew that my time in the Army was up. So my husband came home that night. We went on a walk with the baby, and we just had a conversation about it, and we were like, well, this really kind of sucks, but the Army has made a choice for us. It truly was not a choice. And because I had already fulfilled my initial obligation and didn't owe the Army anything else, I submitted my letter of resignation the next day. So when I say I resigned overnight, I literally did. I submitted my letter of resignation one day after finding out that I was going to deploy. And people have a really hard time with that. I didn't get out of the Army overnight. It took me about 6 months to get out of the Army. It's a long transition. But I resigned overnight, and my resignation was approved 3 days later. So it all happened really fast. And, I got out of the Army. I had served at that point for 12 years on active duty. And when I got out, it was like nobody cared. So my husband deployed, and now I'm out of the Army I'm home with my almost 1-year-old now. And it was like nobody cared. No, it didn't really get a true, thank you for your service. And I was just amazed at how much of a non-event it was. Because to me, it was like the biggest event of my life. Becoming a mom was so hard. It was such a huge transition for me. But then, honestly, I think that leaving that network, losing that network, and losing my sense of identity was an even bigger deal. And I mourned that loss. I struggled with that loss every day, still. I still do miss it. I still miss the people I served with. I still miss the mission. I miss the mission mindset. There's so much about it that I miss. And that was me. I was meant to serve in the military, and I loved it, and I was good at it. So anyway, I now am staying home with the baby, and my husband is deployed. His career took off when mine came to an abrupt halt, and that was exceptionally hard. And I resented him and his career embarrassingly much. I don't even want to say how much I resented him. And he would, leave, or he'd call from being overseas, and he would be like, I wish I could stay. And I was like, you do not wish you could stay here. I was bored out of my mind at home with this baby. And it was so hard. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. And because of all this, I felt so guilty for feeling this way, because I was around all these stay-at-home moms. I was suddenly surrounded by everyone who had kids. Before that, I had literally no friends with kids. All my friends were professionals that I met in the Army. No one had kids. I never hung out with kids. And then I went from that to hanging out with people that had kids, because I now had something in common with them, and I just thought that's what we would do. And we did all these play dates and blah, blah, blah. And I was so unhappy, and I was so unfulfilled, and I felt like crap about myself and about my life, because it seemed like they were all loving their lives and they were enjoying it, and they were meant to be stay-at-home moms, and I was just miserable, and I hated myself for it, and I felt guilty about it, and I resented my husband and all this stuff, and I struggled. I really struggled with my own mental health, with my sense of identity, with my purpose. And I think it's important to put that out there, because so many women, so many people struggle with this, right? And you're not alone. It is really hard. It's hard becoming a mom. It's hard leaving a full-time job. It's hard being a stay-at-home person. It's hard to transition in general, right? So if you're feeling that, just know, first of all, that you're going to get through it. But I think the thing I learned the most is that I needed to figure out how to stay connected with those people that I felt most in common with. And I didn't realize that until I started getting into real estate. And I found my people again, and I was so fulfilled. I actually was working with a lot of military veterans, the West Point network I was really connected with. And it was life-changing for me. And so I think, you know, if you're really struggling with a transition, try to figure out what it is that you're struggling with and focus on that one thing. So for me, it was the network, and I have a feeling it could be that for a lot of people. So just work on that. Work on figuring out what that one thing is that's bothering you or making you feel not content or unhappy or something, and just work on that one thing, and I bet it will make a lot of other things fall into place. So anyway, back to kind of the story. I started investing in real estate. And when I bought the first one, the whole point of buying the first one was to offset my husband's income. So I knew if you purchased real estate, you could write off the depreciation and you could write off the mortgage interest on your taxes. And so my thoughts were, well, since I don't have any income, I can offset my income and be contributing toward, you know, our collective income at that point, and then also be building something for our future just by purchasing this one door, this one single family home. So I bought that first door and I was just hooked. I saw the power of real estate at play, and I was just, I had needed more. It was like a drug. And just, it's important for me to tell you though that when we were closing on that house, my husband was deployed. He was like somewhere in the Middle East. And I went to title company to sign the papers, and I had a power of attorney so I could sign for him because I needed his income to buy that property. I just got a conventional loan and I needed to sign for him. So we got a power of attorney drafted by the military lawyers, and the title company didn't like it. They wanted us to use their particular power of attorney that they drafted for that transaction. And I thought that, so anyway, I left that day because I had no way to get in touch with my husband. I had no way to have him sign it. He had to sign it in front of a notary. Just getting the first document was like this huge to-do because he was in this remote area. And so I was like, crap, maybe this is a sign. Maybe we're not supposed to do this. And I left that initial closing bawling. I was crying so hard, and we had just found out we were pregnant with our second kid. And my husband had just left, and I was just like devastated. I was like, maybe this isn't meant to be. This was my first deal. And anyway, I, you know, kind of pulled myself together. We got the power of attorney signed and together, and I went back and I actually closed the second time. And then I was just hooked and I was ready for more. At that point, that was 3.5 years ago, our net worth was $120,000. Now, 3.5 years later, I just did my quarterly accounting, and before I tell you what our net worth is, I want to tell you I have a goal this year of becoming millionaires. I want our net worth to be $1 million. We have a quarter to go. And this is the beginning of October that I'm recording this. We just did a calculation of our net worth. It is $992,000. It was $120,000 3.5 years ago, and it is almost $1 million. By the end of this year, we will be millionaires. And I mean, that's amazing. I'm about to turn 35. My husband just turned 35. We've been doing this for 3.5 years. We're gonna be millionaires.